my presentation is about trying to get a handle on growth, trying to implement steady state economics at the local level. And the concept here is kind of a takeoff from, if you recall, Speaker Tip O'Neill. Back in the 1990s, he wrote a book called All Politics is Local.
Yeah.
Right, the concept being that a political idea really needs to take some root at the local level. You just can't institute it from a higher level, state or national. People have to demand it from a local level as well. And so I'm going to talk about community level control and implementation of steady state economics. Now, all that starts with, at the local level, land use planning, because it's all about how you use the land. And that is all controlled at the local level. And it's not just building buildings. Local regulations control everything related to economics. If somebody has an existing business and they want to expand it, or have more hours or something, they have to get permits to do that. And that's all controlled by the zoning or development regulations. So that's where the heart of the matter is. The issue is a difficult one to overcome because these land use laws have been in existence forever in our societies. And the legal term for land development is called property improvements, right? If you develop the land, you're improving it. If you just leave it there, you're not improving it. So we're going against the tide here, but it has to be done. And the process involves it's a political issue, conflict, discussion about balancing individual property rights, at least in our society, and the interests of others in the community. So that's the basis. In Vermont, and I think this is true in most states, the framework for land use planning and the creation of zoning regulations are defined by state laws, but again, it's really executed by local municipal governments, cities and towns. The overall process is that a town will create a town plan, and it's called a town plan. And these are good. They used to be just 5-year town plans, now they're 8-year town plans, which kind of provides a vision for what the town wants itself to be. And so it's an inventory of its assets and possibilities, and provides some guidance on how the regulations should be written. And then so you start with a town plan, and then they also create development regulations, which are also called bylaws, or often known as zoning regulations, which implement kind of the town plan, or at least they're consistent with the town plan. They're kind of like a detailed blueprint, or more detailed blueprint. Now the action for all of this starts not with a select board, but with a planning commission in your town or city. That's where the action is, because they create the town plan and they create the development regulations as well. They also get some help from what's called regional planning commissions, which are funded in most part by the state. Now the other parts of local governments, like conservation commissions, which are very important, recreation commissions, energy committees, they're merely advisory. They are not, they have no regulatory authority. So it's really all about planning commission. And the select board has an important role to play too, because they will, after the planning commission creates these documents, the select board then adopts them. Now the select board can also allow the voters to vote on it in a town meeting, and some have done that, but they're not required to. And many towns, as they grow, they go from allowing the voters to vote to not allowing the voters to vote. So the select board has a lot of power in that it adopts these town plans and development regulations. It appoints the members of the planning commissions. And it hires the town zoning administrator. So the select board, they have control over all the personnel in the town government who drive growth. Now, the reality is that select board members in most towns, most select board members are very pro-growth. And why is that? Well,
What's the word?
pardon?
Pro what?
Pro-growth.
Thank you.
Are there other questions? No? Okay. So, in my observation, some of the reasons for this are they think that growth increases tax revenues, and it does, but they don't think or consider or admit that growth also increases the costs to the town in terms of budgets. You need more schools, you need more municipal services, you need more social services. And if you're a kind of small town, maybe a lot of this stuff like fire departments, etc., were done by volunteers. You get to a certain point, volunteers can't handle this anymore. So costs increase. Another rationale they have is that construction creates jobs for residents. This is true, but are these sustainable jobs? What happens if the growth stops, if it has to stop? If you run out of room, then what happens to these jobs? It's not sustainable. Another rationale they have is, well, growth creates more customers for local businesses. Okay, yeah, but how big does a business have to be? How much money does it have to make? And why should its desire for more money, more profits, override what other interests of the community might have? Now, a big one also is that, well, growth has been the modus operandi for centuries, since the dawn of civilization, actually. This is what we do as human beings. But this blind inertia, of course, especially these days, cannot or does not choose to acknowledge that there are resource limits that might put an end to growth, maybe sooner rather than later. They're not considering this in their planning. But I think actually the most important reason why politicians, local politicians, are so pro-growth is that most of them benefit from real estate development, they came from. They either were developers or they were previously developers, they are developers, or they want to be involved in development. They're friends of developers. They're educated by developers and the people like the banks and local businesses who benefit from development. So it's kind of an ingrained power structure. So you might wonder, okay, well, let's try and elect growth agnostic or growth averse select board members. And that's certainly a possibility, but it's not a cakewalk trying to unseat incumbent select board members. There is a lot of resistance. And to recruit and elect 3 new select board members out of a 5-member select board, it would require that a large portion of the electorate would have to be ready to abandon growth. And I don't think, publicly abandon growth, that we're not at that point right now. Now, whereas people are not especially eager to have government officials implementing steady state policies, I think people personally are willing to implement steady state policies themselves. They want to have their town stay small and quaint and livable and easy. They want to be able to know all their neighbors. And so they're willing to make steps to anonymously vote in the ballot box to make that happen. Fortunately, in Vermont, this is not true in most other states, but in Vermont, there is an option to do this at direct democracy. And in addition, a lot of Vermonters, they like the idea of having the right to self-governance and exercising this right. If they're asked, well, why do you want to have the ability to approve a town plan? Say, well, why not? Why not? Give me the opportunity. So, Vermont law provides for this through citizen petitions. It's Chapter 17 of the Vermont state laws. Is that signatures from 5% of registered voters can add a ballot question at a town meeting. Now, if the article is binding, that's true. And the article is binding if state statute gives citizens the right for that article. And it turns out that state law does allow this for town growth sorts of issues, town plans and town development regulations. Chapter 24 of the state statutes allows for the citizens to have an article or to demand or vote for the ability to approve town plans. So that it's not up to the select board anymore just to allow whether the voters can vote on it or not. The voters can say, we want that part. And the select board has to go along with that. They also have the right to approve any changes in bylaws or zoning regulations. Again, it requires an article in the town meeting, and it can only be done in what's called rural towns. So you couldn't do this in a city, for instance. But in rural towns in Vermont, voters have the ability to ask for the right to approve for any changes in zoning regulations. And a rural town, in most cases, is 5,000 residents or less, which is a lot of towns in Vermont. A lot of towns.
So it doesn't depend upon how the town is governed, it's the size of the town.
It's the size of the town. Although, it also has, the town has to vote by Australian ballot. You can't just, if you have a town that all they do is just to have a town meeting in person, and
Yeah.
that won't work.
I mean, my town is a town, it's Middlebury, and we have over 5,000 people, so, but we have a select board.
Yeah. But you still can approve town plans if you want to have that happen, which is a good start. And there are other things you can do too, which I'll talk about later, even if you can't approve development regulations right off the bat. Now I'm going to give you a little story here about my own town of South Hero that happened just recently and experienced kind of this stuff. The last town plan was approved in 2015. It was a good plan, it reflected public input. They did a survey and was pretty close to what the survey asked for. And then in 2020, new development regulations were approved. They didn't let the voters approve it. Were approved, and remember, March of 2020, this was the beginning of the pandemic. Nobody was paying attention in town to any of this stuff. It contained radical changes to the town plan. It increased some high-density zoning districts 100%. 100%? 800%, excuse me, 800%. Districts that they said, no minimum lot size. The offset from building borderlines was 10 feet for buildings. So radical change. Now, it wasn't until the summer of the next year in 2021 that residents kind of woke up to what happened here. And it was initiated because an industrial applicant exposed an inconsistency in the development regulations. And so that being that it wasn't clear that the industrial applicant was permitted to build in this new zoning district or not. And so the Planning Commission had to fix that inconsistency. And they wanted to do it just by a committee vote and boom, it's all done. But one person who had been a member of the committee complained. The regional planning commission's representative said, oh yeah, that's a major change. You're going to need to have hearings on this. She actually could have said, well, that's okay, but fortunately she didn't. We had the hearings, a lot of complaints. There was actually a petition to not approve this that was submitted by 150 people. That's over 10% of the population. And it was ignored. They were all ignored by the Planning Commission, by the Select Board. So what happened was that fall, people really started to get active. There was organizations organizing. They initiated a petition drive to add the 2 articles to the next town meeting. That residents would have to approve, voters would have to approve the new town plans, and would have to approve changes in the zoning regulations. So they prepared for that. They developed a website. Here's a screenshot of the website that kind of went through the history of this and provided a lot of details for folks to read. They sent out a mailer, an info card to all the residents through the post office that kind of summarized these articles and what was in them. They had placed an ad in the local newspaper, and you can't see this, but I want to point out that the publisher of the local newspaper, The Islander, put it next to an article here about forged documents claimed in court during Grand Isle eviction case.
Draws the eye.
Yeah, yeah. This is another illustration of the network of the pro-growth folks. It includes the local newspapers in most cases, because when you think of it, the Islander is a free publication to begin with, so they make all of their money from advertisements by local businesses and the Chamber of Commerce. So they didn't publish an article about these the articles that we submitted for voter approval. We submitted them back in December of 2021. They didn't publish anything about them until this ad was placed in there just a couple of weeks before the vote. Anyway, just another piece of the story here. So We had the town vote, and here are the results. Should voters adopt town plans? 55% said yes. 43% said no. Adopt bylaws, 55% again said yes, 43%. So we got it passed. So next time, we're gonna be able to do this. There are also lots of, you can imagine, front porch forum postings about it. The first posting actually was by the local big developer who said, no, we can't have any of this. But there were a lot of postings by a number of people who supported it, so it was great. So that's that story. Now there are some other articles that are binding too that can be important. Bylaws can be amended. You can have an article in town meeting to amend an existing bylaw. And actually, South here, we're probably going to be doing this to reverse the what they did in 2020. But again, it requires a petition signed by 5% of the voters. But that can be done. The town plan can be amended as well. That's not as much of an issue for us, but for others it might be. And so something to consider. A couple of other potential articles that can be binding. You can recall a bylaw amendment that the select board just approved. But the difference here is that it's got the petition signed by 5% of the voters has to be submitted to the town clerk within 20 days. Not a lot of time. And then it also requires a special town meeting, which there's a certain expense to that, not a lot, but that can be a barrier to getting it. Another thing, I don't know how often this is done, or how much this is done, but you can have an article that requires that the planning commission members be elected rather than appointed by the select board. So that's something else. But I guess in summary, what I'd like to say is that there's very good news, because Vermont state law allows communities the ability, provides residents in their local communities the ability to rein in unfettered growth. And so this is something that Better Not Bigger would like to encourage, or at least let a lot of people know throughout the state that this is possible. The biggest first step is it requires some work on the part of citizens. You can't do it by yourself as an individual. You need a team. You need to start to, folks need to start to attend planning commission meetings or select board meetings, or at least listen to them. Know what's going on, be involved, and stay on top of it. But it is possible. And also wanted to say that Wolfgang Schneider is the president of our board, and George is also a member of our board, of course, and we're all happy to help and provide assistance. We're not lawyers, we can't guarantee everything. We have not used attorneys ourselves in understanding these laws. They're pretty clear, actually, the way that the statutes are written, and so we can provide a lot of guidance in pointing you to the right place to go. Yes, ma'am.
I want to disagree with you about it. You said it would be hard to get on the select board. I'm a member of the Conservation Commission of the town of Berlin, and we have just been in an extended battle that we lost because some people who are members of VAST wanted to have a trail through the town forest. And they got on the select board so that they could accomplish that, I think. And the reason I think that is because I called up a member of the Conservation Commission and I said, now, tell me who I want to vote for because I want to make sure I don't vote for any of these vast people. And he said, oh, they're all going off. So it's pretty clear to me that they got on the select board to get their trail, and having done that, they were going to get off.
Okay.
So I'm too old to do it, but I'm thinking that it would, we frustrated members of the Conservation Commission are saying somebody ought to get on the select board on our side. And I wish I could, but I'm too old. But I do think that it seems to be quite possible to sort of volunteer to be on the select board, at least in the town of Berlin. That these are not jobs that people are really excited about, and so it may be that this is something that people could do.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to
Sure.
suggest that to you.
Question, so you said that 3 select board members are retiring, they're not,
They're not rerunning.
they're not running again, yes. I agree that in that situation where you have an open seat where you're not running against an incumbent,
Yeah.
yes, there's a much better chance of getting elected. Would everyone else agree with that? Yes, sir.
I'm just thinking about these radical zoning changes that were in North Hero or South Hero?
South Hero.
Where are you on this, the whole thing of smart growth and the initiative and the legislature to their concern is sprawl, you know, and so they want to encourage, if we're going to have growth, in dense, they want to have it in dense, selected area in the old town centers, and fill up the empty storefronts and that sort of thing. So are you in favor of that, or it sounded to me that maybe some of that plan was trying to encourage that, but I don't know.
No, I think you're right, and definitely the state is pushing that. In South Hero, the Regional Planning Commission is pushing for dense growth in the village zoning districts. But I would go back to Dr. Erickson's talk about efficiency and sustainability. Okay, yes, smart growth might probably does improve efficiency, but does it really provide for communities that are going to be healthy and what people love? I love the way my town is now. I moved from outside Washington, D.C. because there were no communities back there anymore that, for me, provided a healthy environment, mentally or physically or spiritually. So.
Well, my town is characterized by overpriced housing and underpopulated schools. And I think because of that, there is a legitimate argument in favor of creating more housing that is affordable for people, for younger families who can then afford to live in the area. We have a good-sized hospital and a very large college employing a lot of people who can't afford to live in the community. And we have people coming across the lake from Ticonderoga and Port Henry and places like that because they can't find a place to live in any of the communities around Middlebury. So Middlebury College has just entered into a project to acquire a piece of land and to work with a developer in creating a kind of a mixed housing project, which will include some rentals and some single family. And it's in an ideal location, walkable and bikeable to the center of town, right beside some preserved forest land. And I certainly regard that as a positive kind of growth for our community.
I would agree. If you've got the jobs already in the community, that's great. In South Hero, it's mostly a bedroom community for Burlington,
Yeah.
and still has farmlands and a resort area in the summertime. So there is a need for summertime affordable housing for workers in the restaurants, for instance.
But if we're concerned about reducing emissions, it seems to me having denser housing that requires less commuting and allows more biking and walking is a goal we should embrace.
Absolutely. Again, if people have a place to go and do their food shopping, for instance, and go and work,
Right.
it's all walkable or at least accessible via bike.
Yeah.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
In Charlotte, we have a similar problem. That's to say, they wanted to build some more dense housing, low-income housing or affordable housing. The only problem is there are no jobs there. So these people would have to commute. So this doesn't really solve that commute problem in that case. And a lot of times, you know, we want to bring industry in. Oh, then we need more housing.
Right.
And then we need more industry, more housing. So it sort of grows, feeds on each other.
The local supermarket would be right near needs more shoppers. I mean, we don't want to lose that supermarket, right?
Right.
So, could use the extra business.
But to reach a point of balance that doesn't then expand out of control, I think there's got to be a kind of a balance point.
I think that's a perfect term, balance. Yeah.
Well, isn't that what sustainability is in a sense, really?
Balance?
Yeah. George, George years ago headed up a study on sustainability for Vermont. And he looked at 12 different indicators, 15 different indicators of what sustainability really means for Vermont. I thought it was a very interesting study because it basically said that back then, which we had about 600,000 people, that we are marginally sustainable on some of the indicators and already unsustainable in some of the other indicators. That study is actually available on our website if anyone's interested in following up on it.
What are some of the 15?
Beg pardon?
What are some of the 15 indicators?
Well, one of them, for example, is democracy, which I found interesting. You know, we are more democratic at the town level than you would be in the city.
Right.
Okay. Others are agriculture, water, forestry.
Food.
They're both subjective and objective indicators, such as scenic beauty.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know,
That
I've
was
seen
one.
scenic beauty
Yeah.
disappear somewhat in my town because of population growth.
Yeah.
It really affects me adversely.
So then we work climate refugees into our vision for the future. How's that going to look in terms of local land use?
Right. These won't
I'd like to point out that our new coordinator is one of those.
Is a climate refugee?
She is a climate refugee. She moved to Vermont deliberately to, I forget where she came from, but at any rate, when you hear, here they come. Here's one that actually has gotten there.
And we seem to have a shortage of employees in a number of fields, including the place where I get my oil changed. Normally I would be able to get an appointment within 2 or 3 days. Now it's a week to 10 days.
We actually have the worst gap between jobs available and advertised and the people to fill them in the entire country, across every sector.
And this is with the present level of economic activity, not factoring in growth.
Has anyone done a real study of why that is? It's not only COVID, because we only have, 650 people who departed.
Yeah.
Mostly not from the labor pool, probably.
We have the second oldest population in the country.
So it's aging.
And we're losing, there's a huge demographic wave moving into retirement from the baby boom generation. But we've built a state that we love, and people are staying. And so they're taking a whole house, where that might have been 4 people living in a house, there's 2 people living in a house. And so there's not anywhere for young people to come to and afford that's open at scale, opening up at scale. And yet the needs to sustain us are still there. My plumber's 72 years old. I keep waiting for him to retire, and I know of people waiting 6 months for a plumber, and I'm in Brattleboro. I'm not like out in the middle of nowhere. So that's just an easy example, but it's we are in a very complex environment.
Yeah, a discussion we've had in our town regarding that point is to try and maybe have some senior housing where these people who are living alone or together in a 4-bedroom house, they can move into the senior housing and open up their house for a younger family.
Yeah, and Brattleboro's looking at something similar. We have a fair amount of senior housing, but we're looking at even more for that very same reason. But also there's an equity issue too. Brattleboro has 880 of the affordable housing units in and around the Beltway around Brattleboro out of 900. So how, so what does that say? What does that say about our shared values together, since those other towns are not sharing in the responsibility to ensure that for the people who need affordable housing and are living lives that need more supports, that they're contributing to that as well. Said that we don't have county government at a taxation level, so we're not in this together, which is another problem we have to solve to address how we grow, the density in a way that is heading into stable state rather than heading into Brattleboro has to pursue growth and the outlying communities can be stable. That's not actually a healthy system.
Right. It's that way in Madison County too. The small towns, including Weybridge, are sort of where the gentry live, on their large acreage lots and very expensive, nice houses. The little tiny pockets of poverty, fairly invisible. Yeah, there is an imbalance there, but on the other hand, there's an efficiency there as well. To put 50 units of low-income housing in Cornwall or Weybridge, which are at some remove from Middlebury,
Then you have to get the transportation there because transportation access is a huge gap for people who are struggling.
I think another factor is that in the past, we used to have multiple generations living in one house. Now we seem to be splitting apart into multiple houses. We have more single-family residences. And home share, I think, would help if more people participated in home share.
Yeah, that's a nice grassroots kind of approach. I like it.
Accessory buildings is another potential solution where like an accessory building could be built to house another family at low income maybe. And with, I don't know how the laws are, but maybe there could be an option to purchase if the lot size is large enough to be able to subdivide at some future date, for instance.
Yeah, those solutions like home share and accessory dwellings tend to be motivated by necessity. And in an affluent state and an affluent community, that necessity does not always
Mm,
exist.
mm, mhm.
Congratulations on the work you're doing up there, Bob, in South Hero. This is setting a very good example. I understand that a few years back, there was a strong move in South Royalton and Stratford to not be for growth housing. You know where that's at now?
Don't, South Royalton.
In Stratford?
Well, are you talking maybe about the effort against the Mormon development? Is that part
Oh,
of it?
yeah.
Big part of it, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I know Grand Isle had a recent experience with the Lake Champlain Transportation Company wanting to install its service facility there. Do you have any insights into how that went down?
They finally got it approved,
Yeah,
so.
and that seems like a fairly clear example of going against this rural, pristine, desired
Right, but,
on behalf of tax revenue, I assume.
well,
Jobs.
it also made sense in that they were going to be doing work for an existing business there
Yeah.
that needed the work done anyway, so why not do it right next to it?
Mhm.
Which would make things much more efficient
Yeah,
for everybody.
yeah.
The other option would have been to have that facility in an industrial park that does exist in Grand Isle, town of Grand Isle,
Mhm.
but that is several miles away from the ferry.
Mm.
So, yeah, I think, these are discussions that come up in
Right.
towns, and
Sure.
there are pluses and minuses to everything.
Bob, in gathering signatures, did you use Front Porch Forum a lot? Did you get much response via Front
No,
Porch Forum?
no, and this is another thing, is we lucked out in that we had one person in our team who, for whatever reason, he had a beef against the town, and he had plenty of time, and he got the bulk of our signatures. He just spent days, a couple of days,
Yeah.
walking around and getting them all.
Every cause needs a champion.
Yeah, yeah. Mhm. We call him Brother Bill. His first name's Bill. But that's another piece about needing a team
Mhm.
to be able to get these petitions through. It's very important. Multiple team members have to do different things, write this, write that, write front porch forum postings. Yeah, it's important.
I serve on the town planning commission in Underhill. And another avenue for getting your voice heard is to write to the planning commission. We get so little
Mhm.
citizen input that whenever someone comes to a meeting or writes in about an issue, it really takes notice because, oh, they must be really concerned about that. So, you know, you don't have to do a lot to make a small inroad, I think. So.
Okay. Well, it's good to know that some planning commissions are open to public input.
They should all be. I
They
think.
should all be, that's right.
In terms of getting on a planning commission, I know in Middlebury, the town reaches out to the public to get people to volunteer, and I don't think they're overwhelmed.
Yeah, we always have an opening because we
Mhm.
don't get enough people
Mhm.
volunteering.
I mean, that might change if there were some threat, major perceived threat to the business interests of certain people,
Mm.
but
Mhm.
normally it's,
The other thing I would say is it takes a long time to make a difference.
yeah.
You know,
Mhm.
writing a town plan, you can get some lofty ideas in there. And then looking at the town bylaws, it's like, how do you incorporate those lofty ideas into every single thing that's in there, and it isn't quick at all.
Yeah, it's a lot of work, and kudos to you for being on that committee. It takes a lot of time
Yeah.
and energy and commitment, so
It'll be interesting.
thank you.
That's where government teachers in high school should deal with this kind of issue as well as some of the ones that are government textbooks, the local, the planning commissioners and so forth, where people actually can get involved. I mean, this is, I'm vaguely aware of it, but I'm not aware of the concrete details you brought out. So I appreciate hearing it, because I don't do too much about big things. Small things are very important too to deal with. And that's one reason we wanted to have this particular session. And because it was complex world there.
Well, that's a good question, Harris. I wonder what is done right now in schools, in the civics
Yeah.
courses, for instance, to educate youngsters about land use
I
planning.
think it's really neglected, my guess is, but it's been a long time since I was there. It's attended international and also they neglect the global, but that's a different issue.
Yeah.
But certainly, go back 30 years when I used to teach government and so forth, I should have done more than that. Of course, we came from a city, so it's a little different. But
Right.
Well, the thing is, we have a structure that if we would use, we have probably the ideal democracy. But in fact, I mean, what you're saying about the planning commission is reminding me about town meeting. You know, when we have these arguments, shall we go to Australian ballot or shall we continue? Why we want to have town meeting, because then we can argue about the budget and what have you. But then hardly anybody shows up. I mean, what is it? You have to get 5% of the town to sign the petition. I don't think we get 10% of the town at town meeting. Maybe we will after post-COVID, because it's been so awful not being able to see people. I mean, and maybe something wonderful will happen at the next one, but it's available, but nobody much uses it, and that's how we're losing our democracy, in my opinion.
Yeah. And ironically, when you go to Australian ballot, the attendance at town meeting further decreases.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, and I think the issues that are raised at town meeting educate everybody, and as well as the select board, who then says, oh, these are the things that are important to the people. Yes, we have this vote, but here's the issues they were willing to speak out about.
Right. And if you oppose the budget at a town meeting, you have to explain why. And perhaps even suggest what you would change. Whereas if you vote against the budget on an Australian ballot, that's just your frustration or your opposition speaking, nothing constructive.
Right. Yeah, it's an important process at the town meeting. I hope it does survive.
Maybe we should vote not on a weekday, but on a weekend.
I think some towns have gone to
Yeah, sometimes,
Saturday.
yeah.
I'm not sure it really helped though,
Right.
from what I've
Because
seen.
Saturday is the one free day, you know, to do family stuff or chores and stuff, so the time is just all with people busy. It's hard.
Well, I have to tell you my favorite story about this. every year, for some years, I was leaving town meeting early because it was on Tuesdays, and that was when we had the midweek Eucharist at our church. And you all remember the year with the hanging chads and well, so I was leaving to go to church, and I said, I have to tell all of those assembled that today's the feast of Saint Chad. It truly was. Somebody asked me if he died by hanging.
Very good. These are all great points, thank you.
Well, one other thought that I had, but if we are going to be drawing on people's desire to keep their towns small, and, you know, which I totally get, I just worry that could a downside of that be a dark side, being drawing on people's desire to keep their town white, and you know, and just afraid of diversity, any kind of racial, ethnic kind of diversity.
That's playing out in Putney right now.
Pardon?
That's playing out in Putney right now.
Putney.
Yeah, of all places.
Jeez.
There was a proposed affordable housing unit, and you know, some of the people, there's been quite a bit of local opposition to building this. It's right next to a senior living space, and it's in sort of an area where there has been some build up, and some people are saying, you're not the one who will do the crime. You're not the, and anytime they get into that, that's often buzzwords. I mean, those are code words for something else.
Yeah, that's right.
And then they say, well, it's the only green space. Well, I mean, it's Putney. It's not a metropolis. It's not the only green space. But you know, that I do think that's why I raised the issue about Brattleboro having all of that affordable housing, where the rest, by and large, don't. Is there is an equity problem. I grew up in Marlboro. I loved growing up in Marlboro in the woods. It's 700, 800, 900 people. I'm not sure exactly what the population is, but now I live in Brattleboro, and I feel really weird about being a townie 30 years later. But the fact is that most people will never be able to afford to buy into Marlboro, even if Marlboro is embracing the most open vision of itself as a community. If the price to get in is 3 times what average families can afford, then it's hard to say that choice is fully grounded in the deepest ethic of our shared responsibility to each other.
That's right.
As opposed to, I can create my special island, but you can't be part of it. And that's a tension for me.
Well, it is a tension.
It should be for all of us.
So if we all had the same income, this problem wouldn't exist. We wouldn't have diversity in housing.
Or approximate, yes.
Yeah, you get rid of millionaires and get rid of poverty.
Back to, I guess, the point that again, John Erickson made about all of his students were, although in most of the questions, there were ones who were for and ones who were against. The one question about was it capitalism or
wages.
yeah, everybody was against it and said that change had to take place.
Well, you get back to this as an interfaith council, and so belief systems, spirituality, materialism, or the meme that we talked about the last time, those are solutions as well as going to the local planning commission. They both are needed, and we all have to specialize a little bit, I think, for everything.
Yeah. It's going to mean efforts on multiple fronts.
Yeah.
I always worry about the future, the long-term future. It seems like planning doesn't really take into consideration the possibility that there may be fewer fossil fuels available, that we may not be able to travel as easily as we might, that we may not have shipping coming into Vermont. Most of our food comes from outside of Vermont. What are we doing to feed ourselves? What are we doing to energize our houses, to heat our houses? Are we thinking of 2030? Are we thinking of 2050? I'm not sure we are.
It's hard for politicians who have an election next year to.
That's right.
That's one of the problems, maybe, huh?
I can tell you some of that is happening. I apologize, I'm not trying to dominate this space in any way. Since I've served for 10 years in your legislature, if you're Vermonters, then I just happen to have some of these things more at my disposal. So there's a food security strategic plan that we may be funding this year that's actually looking at how do we take all that we've done in farm to plate and our forest management plans and try to sort of think strategically about our resources around food security in the long run. What do we want to learn from a pandemic in terms of local resilience? That's one place. There's also the clean heating bill that we're pushing right now that would help us shift our home heating to cleaner sources. That may get vetoed by the governor, I don't know yet, but you know, those are through the lens of multi-decade long, like how do we build the Vermont that we want to, you know, imagine the thriving that we want in the future and how do we get there. But not that we have all the answers, but we are at least trying.
I think Vermont's doing better, certainly.
And we're so small that we're not that far removed from being a planning commission to be reaching with the legislators. Just so I was going to say that earlier. I'm like, let's stay back. But it's still true. Like, if a legislator hears from 10 individuals in their district, that has an impact. It does not have to be hundreds. And I know this viscerally. I was one of the vote counters for 4 years and in the House, and so I watched it happen. And so just as hard as all of these are to grapple with, at the local level, at the state level, like actual engagement with the people who are trying to do the work, whether it's planning, select board, or legislature, does make a difference. We really do need those voices. We depend on that to learn and understand. And it doesn't need to be a huge mass. It doesn't have to be the huge petition, although that's sometimes very, very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
More locally, in Madison County, about 15 years ago, when that peak oil worry was all big, and a group was organized called ACORN.
Oh, yeah.
Sounds
Addison County.
Addison County
Relocalization network.
Relocalization Network. In other words, anti-globalization. I thought it was the most marvelous statement of the concern in the title of an organization. And they're going strong in they've split into two groups. One is Addison County Renewable Energy Cooperative. And they're the ones that have been putting in these big community solar projects, 2 of them so far, maybe 3 of them actually in Addison County. And then the other is a food thing run by some people try to, and they publish a wonderful annual booklet of all the local farmers in the area and what they have to sell, stuff like that. But the original vision was, you know, is we need to gear ourselves up for hard times, you know, and to be able to sustain ourselves locally and not be so dependent on everything else. So.
That's fabulous. Yep. Yeah, we often talk in Better Not Bigger about that there probably will be hard times. And even though there's not a lot of talk about peak oil anymore, it's there still.
People don't want to think about it.
No. And especially those on the other side of the political spectrum.
Right. Right.
But it's real, and yeah, we're gonna need to deal with it, whether we like it or not. Thank you all.
Thank you.
It's been
Thank you.
terrific.
This has been very good.